Welcome to the Workplace Podcast. We've got an incredible guest today, and I'm really excited for the insights and ideas they'll be sharing. There are so many practical learnings from the conversation that will make a difference to you, your team, or organization. If your organization is interested in a workshop on this topic of the podcast, feel free to get in touch via our website, yellowwood.ie. If you want to support our podcast, and you'll find a link to our Patreon in the podcast description. Thanks in advance for listening and your support. Now, let's take a different path to success. Welcome to the Workplace Podcast. Joining me today to discuss her book, The Relationship-Driven Leader, is Karen Bridbord. Karen is a licensed psychologist with expertise in clinical psychology, organisational behaviour and counselling. She is a Gottman certified couples therapist who applies psychological research to the workplace. Through her firm, Karen Bridbord and Associates, she has supported organisations in achieving their people strategies while building their talent pipelines and succession plans. Her career has spanned a range of industries, including law, technology, construction, finance, and the arts. Her new book, The Relationship-Driven Leader, Strengthening Connections to Enhance Productivity and Wellness at Work, integrates her expertise in the science of human connection with best practices for business productivity and wellness optimization throughout the organization. Karen, welcome to the Workplace Podcast.
Thank you so much, William. It's a delight to be here this morning.
Well, it was a delight to read this book. And the reason I liked this book, the note that I wrote on the inside of it is finally a leadership book that goes beyond the surface. And what I mean is it's a real refreshing take on what it means to lead. It's understanding and navigating that complex web of relationship at work. And what I really liked were these concepts, which we will discuss in the podcast, was how to complain without blame. Love that. Recognizing the four horsemen of the apocalypse and the damage that type of communication can have. Understanding attachment styles, would you believe, at work. Making effective repair attempts, and that's from your work with the Gottman Institute, and the bids for attention. So overlooking the power of those simple bids there. So whether you're leading a team or striving to build more cohesive workplace relationships, this book is a must read. And it's really about learning how to handle those difficult conversations without defensiveness. It's a game changer, I have to say, for team dynamics. And I especially love the quotes. The team collaboration assessment alone is worth buying the book. And then the theory and how it relates to the workplace, like, it is a must read, listeners.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And, when I set out to write this book, I really wanted to write it in a way that was down to earth and that people felt like it was a conversation. So that was really important to me. The tone of the book, how I was writing it, I wanted it to even be almost a coaching companion to people. Obviously, I can't. I can't work with so many people. I'm only one person, but I wanted them to get the gist of what it is to really work with an executive coach around and psychologist around these types of challenges that so many of us face. Because what's in the book is not unique to a segment of the population, nor is it industry agnostic, meaning it doesn't matter where you work. You could work at a pizza shop or you could work at a big bank, right? You can work in a medical office, you could work in a school. It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, people are people. And so the book really talks about the context by which people work, which is often in relationship and in teams, and what happens, and hopefully with some really good takeaways that people can leverage. Because at the end of the day, I want people to feel empowered by reading this book, that relationships aren't just something that happen to you, but that you can actually take ownership and be empowered to impact relationships positively, right? And I provide those strategies to be able to do so.
And let's start with this quote then. And this quote from chapter 1, The Mirror. So self-awareness in the workplace is the first step to relationship mastery, as they say. He who knows others is wise. he who knows himself is enlightened. And I think there is a big aspect of, especially when you talk about leadership or workplace relationships, you have to know yourself first, don't you?
Absolutely. It is truly the first relationship, right? So when we're talking about relationship with other people, we
Yeah,
can't even get there without understanding our relationship to ourselves. And
yeah,
that means, not having to have been fully psychologically analyzed. That's not what I mean, but understanding yourself in a very basic way. What are your values? What are your triggers? What are the things that lead you to be engaged? What are the things that turn you off, right? Just
yeah,
because we have these unique, right, personalities and reactions, by the way, doesn't mean that we have to express them, right? They can be
mm,
there. And that's what really differentiates us from other animals is
yeah,
actually metacognition, which is our ability to observe ourselves, our ability to know ourselves. And when we do that, we actually have a choice. We can either react a certain way or respond another way. So it really starts with ourselves and our relationship to ourselves, so that when we are interacting with others, right, we have that awareness and we can help the best aspect of ourselves come out when in relationship.
and in the book you talk to us and you educate the listener on a relationship system failure. Now, for our listeners, what's a relationship system failure? That how does what has this got to do with my self awareness and relationships?
Right. Well, I wanted to give a term to what happens, the phenomenon that happens when there is a breakdown in
Yeah,
relationship with another person. So, relationship system failure, right, using the computer science field I borrowed from, right, that systemic failure piece. Relationship system failure isn't, I should say, when you have conflict, because conflict is really a normal part of the healthiest of relationships. I think
mm,
people don't like conflict because of some of the other reasons that we'll talk about. But ultimately, there is such a thing as healthy, productive conflict. Now, relationship system failure is when, in essence, you've gotten to a place where it feels like there's really no repair to the
yeah,
conflict or to a series of conflicts, right? Where the relationship has really gotten to a place where it's not functional. You're really
mm,
not able to work together. And it's because it's become personal in some ways. It hasn't become
yeah,
about that thing that you're working on. It's become about just these dynamics that have ensued. And that usually doesn't happen quickly. It usually happens over time where people can get into RSF, relationship system failure.
yeah,
Certainly, um, people will seek support normally when they get to that place, but not
yeah,
always. They'll either leave a relationship, and certainly in a workplace setting, it becomes more complicated because if you are in an RSF situation with a colleague, right, it can be more complicated around leaving because it is your workplace. And but
yeah,
have no doubt that the reason that people do leave organizations often does have to do with a circumstance where they are at RSF with
yeah.
someone, or they see it headed in that direction.
Yeah, and that's where it's like there's a kind of disconnect between words and actions, and sometimes what you see in a meeting, you hear something else, or actions aren't implemented, or there's a gridlock, as you say, or trust and commitment might be depleted, or
Yeah,
you feel like you can't
yeah.
be transparent with people or upfront with people, isn't there? Because you're afraid of what might happen.
Exactly. At that point, there's just no psychological safety, right?
Yeah,
People, the trust has been eroded. And quite frankly, at RS, by the time you reach RSF, it's almost, you're really questioning and thinking you want a way out, right? So it's
yeah,
breakdown. It's
yeah.
breakdown. That's what it is. It's relationship breakdown.
And what I like, this is on page 14, then you go into it to say, here are some statements that you might recognize as we're fighting more than ever, or our arguments escalate quickly, or we've irreconcilable differences, this
Yeah.
sense of
Yeah. We don't
unfairness there.
share, we don't share the same values or goals.
Yeah,
know, I feel ignored, I feel disrespected. Usually by the time we get to RSF, it's again, it's not about the thing that we're working on together in the workplace. It's
Yeah.
very personal, right?
Yeah.
It's what are we actually even arguing about?
Yeah.
It feels like it's something larger than life. And certainly I think when it comes to personal relationships, people can identify with that. I mean, divorce is
Yeah.
at a high level at this point, right? And oftentimes in a divorce situation, people are getting into an RSF, but understand that this happens in the workplace as well. That's the
Yeah.
thing. The difference is that how people go about quote unquote divorcing is a bit different, right? So
Yeah.
either people end up shifting departments or leaving
Yeah.
companies or moving projects or
Yeah.
whatever it is. But I can tell you that this is what keeps people up at night, right? I was just giving
Yeah.
a training program last week in Dallas here in the States. And I asked people, so there was a big room, there were about 250 leaders. And I asked, how many people here have lost sleep over a conflict in the workplace that was
Mm.
either explicit or hidden? And the entire
Mm.
room raised their hands, right?
Yeah.
Because this is what happens in the workplace, right? I mean, at the end of the day, we're human beings, and the challenge with conflict is that we actually need it to help solve for our problems in the
Yeah.
workplace, meaning our solutions that we're trying to come
Yeah.
up with as a team. What ends up happening is that we're human, so all sorts of other things can get in the mix. And although people say, yeah, I'm objective. I'm completely objective
Yeah.
when it comes to problem solving. Um, it's hard to be, and it's
Mm.
hard to be fully objective if you feel like you're being undermined, right?
Yeah.
It's hard to be fully objective if you feel like, you're not getting along and you're not being listened to, right? So,
Yeah.
and yet we have a lot of great research that indicates that diverse groups, meaning with people from different backgrounds, can
Yeah.
actually make better decisions than any
Yeah.
one individual. And
Mm.
that's because people see different things and problems, right? The
Yeah.
challenge is having those strong relationships, or those relationships, those working relationships that are productive and supportive and encouraging, that actually allows us to work through differences in perspective and opinion in a respectful way to be able to
Yeah.
get to the best solution. So
Yeah.
at the end of the day, when we can work through conflict appropriately, and
Yeah.
know ourselves well enough to also use our emotional intelligence, right, to recognize when we're being
Yeah.
triggered, and why are we being triggered, and can we set that aside for a minute to focus on the greater good, right? That's another piece,
Yeah.
right? Um, then we can actually get to those best solutions, right?
Yeah. A- And you mentioned there's other things in the mix, and you also mentioned groups. And I do a lot of work for high performance teams. I love that you've actually said this at the top of the page, navigating group dynamics, because you said there's six areas that we need to pay attention to. It's roles and norms, membership, communication, power, and identity. And there's lots to I suppose navigate, because then you have like power imbalances in a group, or the identity, whether it's race or ethnicity or gender or age, there's professions, there's loads of stuff that goes in there. So there's lots of nuances to understand, isn't there, in navigating group dynamics?
There are a lot of nuances. And here's the thing, because I don't want people to get overwhelmed, right, by all
Yeah,
of what do I focus on, And so it's
yeah,
almost like one step at a time. And I
yeah,
think the model that I most want people to take from this book, right, to
yeah,
help them feel grounded and feel like they can do something, is that, first step around having those sound relationships, right? And at the end of the day, your one-on-one contact with each person
yeah,
becomes significant for when you then enter the group setting. And that is, yes, we can talk about all those other pieces, but certainly we understand that, in a very fundamental way, respect, communication,
mm,
commitment, being able to recognize people for the good that they do, right? Having a skill set to be able to give productive feedback, right?
Yeah.
Because the way a group elevates is truly by having open, trusting communication. No one is perfect, right?
Yeah.
Everyone makes mistakes. So sometimes, though, people make errors, they don't realize they made an error. So
Yeah.
how do you give that feedback to someone so that they can grow from it, and so that the group can get even better, because there
Yeah.
are opportunities, right, for the group as it's working through its challenges. And let's get real that in organizations these days, people are working on some pretty complex information, and with pretty
Yeah.
complex information, there is an interdisciplinary aspect to working with
Yeah.
organizations that's coming together now. With AI, it's becoming even,
Yeah.
more complex. And we have to go back to basics around
Mm.
relationships and relating to each other, how to manage conflict, how to get around our
Yeah.
goals, how to understand what our values are, often in the midst of conflict. Because oftentimes, in organizations, goals are pretty clear. They're working towards
Yeah.
something, right? These days, once in a while, I'll, come across a situation where the goals don't seem clear, the
Yeah.
overarching goals. But generally speaking, I think people are clear what their North Star is, what they're working
Yeah.
towards. The challenge is, each person could be working on a different aspect to get to that North Star. And there
Yeah.
becomes conflict because one person is working on one aspect and thinking, no, 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 we need to get this in by next week. And we have this
Yeah.
deadline to get to that North Star. And someone else is thinking, wait a second, the quality is not what it needs to be.
Yeah.
I know that we're looking to next week, but we're not going to be ready for launch next week. And then they start having the conflict, right? And
Yeah.
but it's not really about that underlying premise necessarily. So we have to daylight what's driving our behavior too, and that requires self-awareness. Well, the reason that I'm rushing through this is because we need to get there by next week. But somebody
Yeah.
else might say, that was a soft deadline, actually, and the
Yeah.
quality is not where it needs. We need to be spending more time on this, that, and the other.
Mm.
But to be able to have those open conversations where you're actually discussing the right thing and not the Okay, we all know the
Yeah.
North Star, but let's talk about what's actually getting us into conflict at the moment, right?
And that's where, you know, you talked about getting back to basics there and having open conversations. But to do that, this is where you now introduce us to creating intentionally healthy relationships. Now, if I'm listening in and I'm struggling with someone on my team, how do I create that healthy relationship with someone?
Yeah. So, remember, relationships are a process. And first of all, I want to say that if you're trying to have a relationship with someone that you're feeling like you're struggling with them, ask them, first of all, I would say, for a time
Yeah.
to connect, an informal time. Now, if you go over to that person in the workplace and try to start making, let's say, hey, let's get to that, that may not be the right time, because at the end of the day, you may
Mm.
not know that at any given time what that person is dealing with at that very moment. So
Yeah.
I usually encourage people to, when they want to repair or reach out, or they feel that the relationship isn't where they want it to be, to ask the person, first of all, hey, I'd like to get together. Why don't we go have coffee, tea,
Yeah.
whatever, maybe through an email or a text message. I'd like to catch up.
Yeah.
When you approach someone live, you never
Yeah.
know their mental state, meaning at that moment. So better to
Yeah.
give them an opportunity. And this is the nice thing that we have, actually, email or text or these other ways of communicating, so that you're not catching them off guard, right? So
Yeah.
you're giving them an opportunity to respond to you in the best way possible. Chances are they will
Mm.
respond to you with a time that works for them, or with a set
Yeah.
of time that works for them. I think that there is something about just getting to know people, and having that opportunity to connect with them informally as a human
Yeah.
being. I write about this in the book a little bit as well, that time that we spend at the beginning of meetings to just talk about things that have nothing to do with a meeting,
Yeah.
many people will say that is such a freaking waste of time. We could have
Yeah.
covered this content in 10
Yeah.
minutes. And instead we spent an hour, or we spent 30 minutes talking about the latest, I don't know, restaurant that opened on the corner. What
Yeah.
a waste of time, but it's actually not a waste of time. This is what people don't
Yeah.
understand, because it's through those informal conversations that we build trust, that we
Mm.
get to know people a little bit, or at least know their preferences, their likes, their
Yeah.
dislikes. It's a safe space to be able to talk about something neutral, like the
Yeah.
restaurant down the street,
Yeah.
potentially. Because guess what? When we are solving for problems in the workplace, those tend to be more high stakes conversations,
Yeah.
because they have to do with certain outcomes that could very much impact the bottom line, how the
Yeah.
organization, how the department is doing. So we want opportunities to build the emotional bank account through
Yeah.
these neutral exchanges where we build trust. Hopefully, as we build the emotional bank account, we have enough buffer there so that when we
Yeah.
actually have to have hard conversations about work itself,
Yeah.
there's goodwill in there, right?
Yeah.
So that you have built the trust. If you're only having conversations about work, 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 understand that there's going to naturally be less positive buffer for when you have to have those tough conversations, where you have to
Yeah.
have conversations where people can feel threatened,
Yeah.
because and we can talk about how to prevent even that from
Yeah.
happening. You need to have those tough conversations, but the way you build relationships is by having those informal conversations. It's also by recognizing, people, but here's the thing: when you start having these types of conversations, it's important to keep track of what people tell you, because that's also a way to build a relationship. So if somebody tells you, actually, I can't go to that restaurant on the corner because I have a
Yeah.
gluten allergy and all they serve
Yeah.
is, is
Yeah.
pasta that they don't have a gluten, you know, you and you happen to have come across a delicious cookie
Yeah.
that is gluten-free at a friend of yours party who's also gluten-free. I don't know, a month later, if that
Yeah.
happened, following up with your friends, say, I had the best gluten-free experience at this party last week. Have
Yeah.
you tried da 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 da? Right? What that ends up saying to your colleague is obviously that they matter, that you noted the
Yeah.
fact that they're gluten-free, and you're telling them about a really good find that you had. The idea is that these conversations that you have to build the connection with people, it's almost like a string of pearls, right? That you're putting
Yeah.
them together and you're following up with another pearl and another pearl. So
Yeah.
you're building, it's not like a one and done conversation. Sometimes people will say, well, I don't have a very good memory. I don't remember these things about people. Write it down, make a note
Yeah.
for yourself so you can always go back to it and say, oh, yeah. Or Sam over there, he's got a 4-year old. Oh,
Yeah.
man,
Yeah.
and making these notes on
Yeah.
folks, that's how relationships are built. We naturally do this with our closest friends, right?
Of course.
um and by the way, the Gallup has done research over time. They actually found that the number one predictor of people staying in their job is actually having a best friend at work, right? Can you
Mm.
imagine? Right? So having a best friend at work means that you feel like someone has your back. If
Yeah.
someone, you can turn to them, they're
Mm.
safe, they're a safe person for you.
Yeah.
Um, it's someone to connect with, right?
Yeah.
We are social creatures as human
Yeah.
beings. And people won't leave their job, even if they'll make more money going to another
Yeah.
company, because of this connection. So connections are very, very powerful for us as human beings.
Speaking of connection, then this is where in the book, and I loved that you connected attachment styles to the workplace and the relevance of that. So our listeners may not know what attachment styles are. Can you tell us what attachment styles are?
Attachment styles begin when we are first born, actually. So think about the infant and the primary caretaker, right? a baby learns when they cry, is somebody going to be there to help them in that cry, whatever that
Yeah.
cry is about, whether they're hungry or overstimulated or need to be changed, right? Whatever it is. And over time, the baby learns, is the caretaker or are the people around me people that I can count on, right?
Yeah.
And when that happens, right, the young child develops a secure attachment style, right? Similarly, if the baby cries and isn't attended to, in essence, enough time, or they have this intermittent kind of an experience, sometimes the caretaker comes, sometimes they can develop either an anxious or avoidant style
Yeah.
of attachment because they never know what they are going to get,
True.
right? At
Yeah.
the end of the day, what psychological research has shown us that over time, these attachment styles do stay with us. The good news, though, is that when we have different relationships, for example, when we get older and we
Yeah.
partner with someone, our attachment style can actually change for better or worse based on our
Yeah.
relationship with our partner. But generally speaking, people with secure attachment styles will seek out, will not feel comfortable attaching to people who are not consistent.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're there, sometimes they're not. But people will sometimes develop what we call an avoidant attachment style, which
Mm.
is they're not trusting that other people will actually be there for them when they cry. As an adult, that may
Yeah.
mean like, hey, I need this, or that
Yeah.
the other person will not be there, and they may in essence, right, avoid people. They are more avoidant. We
Mm.
can all think of people in our lives who we've met who seem to not respond very much.
Yeah.
They're not consistent, right?
Mm.
And so that can be challenging, or maybe we ourselves tend to avoid. Sometimes
Yeah.
we're there, sometimes we're not. It's an intermittent kind of a reaction.
Yeah.
But what I talk about in the book is that, people who have an anxious type of an attachment style tend to, in essence, over communicate sometimes. They can sometimes even micromanage, right?
Yeah.
Because they're not, in essence, they're exhibiting anxiety, right?
Yeah.
And you're thinking, this is like over information,
Yeah.
or they seem to be micromanaging me. And
Yeah.
sometimes, right, people end up thinking, oh, it's something about me, because as human beings, we
Yeah.
personalize. Maybe this person is responding this way to me because
Yeah.
they think I'm actually incompetent. Um,
Yeah.
oh, I don't like that. I don't, but it's actually about them, that they are over communicating, and because they're
Yeah.
anxious. They're anxious. They don't
Mm.
actually have that sense of you're actually going to show up in the way you need to show up. So
Yeah.
respond in an anxious way. And similarly, avoidant people do the same, but it is a symptom of that lack of secure attachment. And really,
Mm.
the lack of secure attachment means that at the end of the day, people are going to mean what they say and say what they mean. So if they say
Yeah.
that they're going to do something, they're going to do that. And I can
Yeah.
count on them to do it. We all have these assumptions. Knowing ourselves also allows us to understand what our assumptions are about people, right? Because sometimes our assumptions are very off, right? We have a lot of research that say that,
Yeah.
we make assumptions about people, the interview scenario, when we're hiring people in like
Yeah.
1 second, right? That book
Yeah.
Blink talked about 1 second. We're like, this person, I like this person. This person, they're smart. This person, we
Yeah.
don't necessarily have the data to back it up, right? So because we have a lot of information coming at us in our world at any given time, and so we're operating around these assumptions, and so our working models, which often have to do with those earliest relationships, those attachment styles, get triggered at work too. Now, but I'm also here to tell you that if we understand our attachment style,
Yeah.
we have that self-awareness and we think, oh, I tend to be an avoider,
Yeah.
and that's not necessarily going to work well for me. So I've got to be more uh, knowing that I need to be more responsive. If something makes me
Mm,
uncomfortable, I know that I need to be more responsive. And so, how can I do that? So, people can shift and grow. This is what I'm trying to say.
yeah,
It's not a sentence, but that
yeah,
self-awareness piece becomes first to understand yourself as well as to understand others, right? And
yeah,
be careful, though, also, if someone is avoiding, making the assumption that they have an avoidant attachment style. There could be other reasons that people are avoidant. Um,
yeah,
and so we got to be very careful not to be diagnosing people quickly.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
the idea is that there are many ways if you're dealing with a workplace challenge of trying not so much to figure out what's going on with the other person. It's actually figuring out what's going on with yourself, and to try to make bids or turn
yeah,
towards people in a
yeah,
way that will give you, in essence, more information about them so that you can
yeah,
see, is this repairable? Is this conflict, is this avoidance that I'm experiencing from the other person? Is it can I somehow solve for it with the other person? But you need to do work to be able to do that.
yeah. And I'm glad you mentioned those bids for attention. So there's three bids for attention. There's engage towards people. There's the ignoring the bid. So somebody's approaching you in some way and you're ignoring them, so it's away from people, and then it's turned against people in a hostile way. Is that correct? Those
Yeah,
bids for
so
attention?
so yes, so a bid. So basically in any given interaction. So right now, William, you and I are having a conversation,
Yeah,
right? And let's say I'm saying something right now to you. Right this second, you have one of three choices,
yeah,
right? Because by talking to you, I'm making a bid for you, okay?
yeah,
You can
yeah,
either turn towards me, which you are, you're saying, yeah, yeah. That's turning toward, right? Turning toward, by the way, could be verbal. It could also be
yeah,
nonverbal. People don't
yeah,
see, but you're nodding your head right now. That's turning
yeah,
towards. You can turn away from me. All of a sudden, you can, I don't know, pick up your phone, start scrolling
yeah,
through your phone, or maybe you're
yeah,
scrolling through the web. I don't know,
yeah,
or maybe you're starting to do that's turning away from me, or you
mm,
could turn against me. Turning against me would be saying to me, Karen, you know what? I don't agree at all with what you're saying. Like, you really,
yeah,
what the heck are you talking about? Like, so that's turning against me. It's a very simple. So any
yeah,
given interaction, you have three choices, right?
yeah,
Sometimes we're aware of our choice of what we're doing as the right, but sometimes we're
yeah,
not. And that again comes down to self-awareness too. But the idea is that, I am reading how you're responding to me. If you're turning towards me, that will definitely lead me down a path of, okay, I'm going
yeah,
to continue doing what I'm doing. If you
yeah,
start turning away from me, I might say, I wonder what's going on for William right now. He seems
yeah,
distracted. Or I might start making up reasons why you're turning away
yeah,
from me, right? By the way, in the absence of information, people often fill in the blank and not in the
yeah,
positive, right?
yeah,
Unfortunately, as people, we tend to fill in the blank in the negative, right? But at the end of the day, though, I need to be tuned into how you're responding to the bid, and the bid almost becomes a game of ping pong or tennis,
yeah,
right? Where you're bidding, I'm bidding, you know what I mean? The
yeah,
thing in the workplace, though, sometimes is that people are making bids for each other, and people don't even know it,
yeah,
especially if you have a conflictual relationship or you've had
yeah,
tension. There may be just an avoidance in essence, and so unfortunately what happens is that um, bids can be subtle. Bids can be
yeah,
subtle. You might not even realize that someone came and sat next to you in a
yeah,
meeting is a bid. And and that was a bit because it was nonverbal, and you may not
yeah,
realize, you may say to yourself, oh, well, she sat next to me because there
yeah,
was no other seat at the table. But maybe there was another seat and they came to sit next to you on purpose. At the end of the day, this also comes down to giving people the benefit of the doubt. But what we understand from bids, right? Because these bids are so important, is that there's a ratio actually. So for every one turning away or turning
yeah,
against, we need 5 turning towards bids to buffer it. This is an
Yeah.
enormous statistic. This is the
Yeah.
Gottman research, Dr. Gottman's research over 40 years that relates to people in general, which, we as psychologists were very surprised by. We thought maybe
Yeah.
even 3 to 1, 2 to 1,
Yeah.
5 to 1, that you need
Yeah.
5 turning towards for every one turning away or turning against. And by the way, another interesting fact is that a little bit worse than turning against is turning away. And the reason is that over time, when people turn away, there is a complete disengagement between them.
Yeah.
At least in conflict,
Mm.
that turning against, there's some energy. People are at least engaged. Oh, yeah, you don't like that? Oh, let me tell you about what.
Yeah.
At least there's some energy there.
Yeah.
And so it's easier to
Yeah.
help repair a conflict, believe it or not, where
Yeah.
there is outward conflict, as in
Yeah.
when there is silence, because the
Yeah.
silence becomes deafening.
Yes. Yeah. And as a mediator, I would see that. I would often say that to people. If you have apathy in any way, that's so hard to work with. At least if you have that energy, you can shift that into reframe it into a more positive force. But speaking of like a negative force, then that this is
Yeah.
where you introduce the four horsemen of the apocalypse, and that's the
Yes.
criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling.
Yes.
So
Yes.
that
Yes.
really damages communication, Karen, doesn't it?
It does. It really damages communication, William. And this is really the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, which is the term that we gave to these 4 behaviors. They're the reason I believe that people are afraid of conflict or dislike
Mm,
conflict or are
mm.
anxious or want to avoid conflict, for example.
Yeah.
And and the good news is that each of these behaviors has an antidote, meaning something you
Yeah.
can do instead of. But
Yeah.
over time, they do break down not just communication in the moment, but they break down relationships. So
Mm,
criticism is when you have an issue with something that the person has said or done,
yeah.
and you give them that feedback in a way that in essence attacks them as a person. So that
Hmm.
might look like, I really can't believe you missed this deadline again. It's really unbelievable. It's like you don't respect any of us, right?
Mm,
I mean, it's something that, so here you are, or here that example that I just gave, you're giving feedback, but it feels like an attack on the other
yeah.
person.
Hmm.
That the person in essence is disrespectful, maybe
Yeah.
lazy, maybe you can't be counted on. Nobody's going to want to hear that kind of feedback. Certainly, they're not going to agree with it, right? At the same time, though, people in essence do need to be given feedback, especially
Mm,
when they need to be held accountable in the
yeah.
workplace. And
Yeah.
so you need to speak to that, but not in a way that attacks them as a person, right? So it
Mm,
might be, Sam, I know that we said that you would be we gave a deadline of Friday. We didn't get it. I'm wondering what's going on, right?
yeah.
So there's an openness, there's a curiosity, but there's
Yeah.
also a direct, it was really, really important that we get it in on time. As you know, Sally and Jessica, they were waiting for this. And so what happened, and then what can we do to help, how can we help
Yeah.
support you, right? I mean, obviously there are situations where you have repeated circumstances like this, and people
Yeah.
do need to be put on performance
Yeah.
improvement plans, but at the same time, in terms of the feedback itself, it is very, very important to do it professionally, and giving feedback that doesn't criticize the person at the core becomes
Yeah.
very important. So it's in essence complaining without blaming
Yeah.
the individual, right? That's incredibly important. That's criticism. Now, what tends to go hand in hand with criticism is defensiveness, which is the
Yeah.
second horseman, right? Because generally speaking, if a person is feeling blamed, right, or
Yeah.
criticized that they're irresponsible or disrespectful, they're not going to say, "You're right.
Yeah.
I am disrespectful. I am right." They're not going to own that, nor should
Yeah.
they, right? But at the same time, we understand that it's important that to minimize defensiveness because it shuts down conversation. And so
Yeah.
the antidote to defensiveness is to take responsibility, even if it's for a kernel of truth. So if you feel like your character is being blamed, you shouldn't take responsibility for that. But can you
Yeah.
take responsibility for one thing? So yeah, you know what, you're right. It was not, the assignment wasn't turned in on time, right? So that is, you are taking responsibility for that which you didn't do. And then, yes, you can describe what the situation was around that. Maybe you had an emergency, who knows what else happened. But the idea is that you're trying to keep conversation open so conflict becomes productive. Contempt, which is the third horseman, is probably worse than all four horsemen. It's the worst one because there's no antidote to it directly. By the
Yeah.
way, RSF, relationship, right? System failure, like that is usually there's contempt within RSF, right? And
Yeah.
contempt is almost like criticism on crack, right?
Yeah.
It's rather than something that's stated, it's felt. It's,
Yeah.
you're not able to make eye contact. It's the seething. It's the, "I can't stand you. I'm better than you. Get away from me." It's the, it's almost, it can't be, it's felt. It's that tension. It's the tension that can be felt in a room where people really dislike each other fundamentally.
Mm.
And when that is happening, it's very, very hard, right? Very, very hard. Turns out, though, in workplace cultures where there's a lot of positive feedback, that's
Mm.
genuine, that's authentic, not fake, right? Where
Yeah.
there's an authentic recognition of people for what they do well, there are naturally lower levels of contempt.
Okay.
Naturally lower levels of contempt. So when we talk about creating high performance teams, and in high performance teams, there needs to be a lot of ongoing feedback, right? There is a lot of catching people doing things that are right, not just
Yeah.
catching people doing things that are wrong. There are cultures out
Yeah.
there, workplace cultures, where people are looking to find people's
Yeah.
errors, believe it or
Yeah.
not, right? There are those cultures. And in essence, one of the first things we want to do in those circumstances is to really up the positive, because there is
Yeah.
always positive, right? There is always
Yeah.
positive. So again, the antidote to contempt is to creating a culture, an organizational culture where positive feedback is encouraged and exists, where people are very specific and are acknowledging people's superpowers in essence, and when they do things well, right? And the last horseman, which also exists in organizations quite a bit, is stonewalling. And
Mm.
stonewalling is basically, for those who don't know what that is, it's like literally shutting down. It's like, imagine a wall, like a
Yeah.
stone wall. And people stonewall, people shut down in conflict. Believe it or not, not intentionally. Nobody's saying, "You know what?
Mm.
I'm just going to
Mm.
retreat from this
Yeah.
conversation." It's actually a physiological response that happens of shutting down, where people feel
Yeah.
overwhelmed and
Yeah.
they stonewall, and it's almost like a deer in headlights or a shutdown.
Yeah.
It's the fight, flight, freeze response,
Yeah.
right? It's almost either, it could be the flight response or the freeze response, right? Because, by the way, our brains haven't evolved enough from the days of the saber-toothed tiger, that we're responding to threats in our environment, social threats, in the
Mm.
same way as we respond to physical threats.
Yeah.
So, you're seeing people are stonewalling, shutting down, like they're, you know, and in essence, the antidote to stonewalling is actually self-soothing. So when someone is shut
Yeah.
down, that is not the time to continue to have that conversation. By the way, with
Okay.
criticism, one could argue that that's the fight response, that when people
Yeah.
get into that criticism mode, they're in that fight
Yeah.
response,
Yeah.
right? And so with stonewalling, the antidote of self-soothing, that means that if you ever find yourself shutting down when someone is coming at you, it's okay to say, hey, you know what, I am, I need a minute, right? In fact, by
Yeah.
the way, you actually need 20 minutes. Um,
Yeah.
if you're masterful at self-soothing, calming down, it takes 20 minutes. And a trick is that if you keep thinking about the conflict, you will remain in that stonewalling mindset. You actually have
Yeah.
to divert your thoughts to something completely different so
Mm,
that you can kind of calm down
mm,
and then come back to the table. But I'm sure that our listeners can identify both a time where they've shut down and they've
yeah.
probably had someone continue to come at them, like, I
Yeah.
want to talk about this, and you're like,
Yeah.
and you've also probably been on the opposite side of stonewalling, where you yourself have wanted to talk and deal with whatever it is, and the person on the other end has
Yeah.
been like almost like not able to do that because they've been stonewalling, and you may have felt abandoned in that way because you're like, what do you
Yeah.
mean you're shutting like, I want to talk about this, let's figure this out together, right? And you
Yeah.
see a lot of almost um another layer of challenge to conflict when you have one person that wants to deal with a conflict in the moment and the other person who might be stonewalling, and there's a, well, why aren't we talking about this? Why? Because the
Yeah.
person may not be ready to talk about it. And this is a very important piece of conflict management, which
Yeah.
is in essence, you've got to respect the stonewall because it's not
Yeah.
voluntary. And to say, if you are stonewalling, telling the person, you know what, let's come back to this. I
Yeah.
need a minute. I need to collect my thoughts to really
Yeah.
get an understanding of what's happening. Let's talk in an hour. It's
Yeah.
important that you let the person know when you will come back to the table, that you
Yeah.
identify a time where you can come back to the conversation. Otherwise, it feels very open-ended, and the other person might actually feel like abandoned, like you're checking out. It almost becomes a
Yeah.
visceral response of panic for them too. This speaks to the realities, the neurological realities of what happens to the human brain in times of conflict. There's a lot of research out there on this, not Gottman's research. Gottman's
Yeah.
research really did identify the diffuse physiological arousal, DPA, that happens
Yeah.
in stonewalling through his work and as it relates to couples, but this happens in the workplace as well. This really does, and I talk about it in my book. And effective conflict management, notice I said management, not resolution,
Yeah.
because even in the workplace, things aren't always resolved. People see
Yeah.
things differently, but we need to learn
Yeah.
how to manage those differences. And because there is a biological process that's going on in times of conflict, we have to respect that and figure out, first of all, how to minimize it. So we can
Yeah.
prevent that escalation through complaining without blaming, through having a way of giving feedback that doesn't put people on the defensive, right? If we tend to get defensive, we have to learn how to manage our defensiveness and how to physiologically, right? This is a nervous system response. Keep
Yeah.
ourselves calm so that we can stay at the table, right? And obviously, we want to prevent even getting to that contempt phase, right?
Yeah.
So that because once we're there, that's RSF. We want to prevent that,
Yeah.
right? Um, and then finally, with stonewalling, we've got to be able to advocate for ourselves and others. If we see someone is flooded, and not even
Yeah.
take it personally and say, you know what, why don't we pick this up later on this afternoon? Let's
Yeah.
pause and come back, right? Because neuroscience says that, people really we get hijacked through this
Yeah.
fight, flight, freeze response from social interactions.
So we're in a relationship and it gets ruptured like that. This is the last piece that we'll talk about here at the podcast is, and I'm glad you mentioned Gottman there. It's a nice segue into that. Gottman has 5 steps of repair. And do you want to
Yes.
talk our listeners through that before we finish up?
Sure. I mean, listen, it's almost an art of repair. And
Yeah.
what Gottman did in his research is that he really tried to distinguish what he called the masters from the disasters of
Yeah.
couples. And subsequently, in other disciplines as well, there has been an identification of these really productive conflict behaviors, as well as what we do once we find ourselves in
Mm,
conflict, right? It's like, oops, we're here. It's okay. The
mm,
amazing thing is that we can repair. And so the 5 steps of repair really have to do with um, being able to listen to each other's feelings. Like
yeah,
everyone, like I know, and especially at the place of work, the feeling, oh, feelings, where does feelings, yes,
yeah,
feelings are everywhere we go. Guess what, guys? They're even in the workplace. And certainly there are going to be certain people who feel more comfortable expressing their feelings or not.
yeah,
But when you're repairing, to be able to say, hey, when we were in the meeting and you said XYZ and didn't acknowledge the work that we had already
yeah,
done, that made me feel, disregarded, or that my team was
yeah,
disregarded. So let people express what it is they feel.
yeah,
It's also important to let people, and for both parties, right, to express what they feel. It's also very important for both parties to be able to tell their story to the other person.
yeah,
Everybody has a reality, and with conflict, things move very, very quickly, right?
yeah,
And so people need an opportunity to go through the scenario that led to the actual conflict,
yeah,
so that they and when you're on the receiving end of listening to the other person's story, so tell me what happened in that meeting from your
mm,
perspective. So and notice I'm using curiosity, which is incredibly
yeah,
important. By the way, curiosity is a wonderful antidote to defensiveness too, for
mm,
yourself, because when you're curious, right, you can't be defensive at the same moment, right? So
yeah,
the person is telling you their story of what happened in the conflict where you were there, and you're
yeah,
thinking, that's not what I said. That
yeah,
doesn't matter. They say, hey, the sky was green when you said that. You're not going to say, sky green? Are you
yeah,
kidding me? Sky, are you
yeah,
right? So you're listening to their perspective. And
mm,
this is where you're listening curiously, and then you're repeating back to them what you heard
yeah,
them say in an empathic way, even if you don't agree with their rendition.
yeah,
It's still
mm,
their rendition, and you're not going to change their
yeah,
rendition at that moment.
yeah,
So take it in, listen, and summarize to them what you heard. And they get to do that for you too. So it's a
yeah.
two-way street,
Okay,
right?
good to know.
Yeah, yeah, it's active listening. And then the other piece is that you might want to identify um, some triggers that were going on for you that may have led you to maybe snap quicker than you would have liked, or
Mm,
shut down. Maybe you had just gotten news that, something else had happened, and you were bringing that into the conversation with the person. And you could both say, that was a tough day when we talked about that. I had a lot of other things going on. I just learned that,
yeah,
my mother was having some health challenges, or
yeah,
something that contributed to you uh basically getting triggered sooner than you would have liked, right?
yeah,
And then you also want to take responsibility. So,
yeah,
responsibility, is there anything that you want to apologize for that happened? Maybe you did snap too soon, or maybe you didn't listen as well as you could have in that conversation, right? Whatever it is. And then finally, you want to say, you know what, next time we have such a conversation as we did, what can I do differently? One thing that I can do differently, and one thing that you can do differently, maybe a suggestion to help us just communicate more effectively, right? So that's so the framework is really about being able to express feelings, being able to express realities, being able to identify triggers, being able to take responsibility, and then next time a
yeah.
conversation happens, how can you do both you and the other person do things differently? And having this openness is really, really important with people that you work closely with.
Karen, that has been so insightful. We have learned so much from that. If people
Oh,
are interested, that's on page 266, by the way, in the book.
okay.
A
Wow,
quick
you know
summary
better
of
than
that.
me. Yes,
Well,
yes.
there we go. I am prepared, Karen.
You're so prepared, and that's an ultimate turning towards William. So thank you.
You are most welcome. And it was so great having you on the podcast today. If
Thank
people were
you.
to find more about you, Karen, your book and what you do, how might they do so?
Absolutely. Well, there's the website for the book, which is therelationshipdrivenleader.com. There's also my website, which is karenbridbord.com, and I'm certainly on LinkedIn. And so any one of those avenues are great ways to find me.
Karen, thank you so much for joining the Workplace Podcast.
Thank you so much, William. My pleasure.
Thanks so much for listening to the Workplace Podcast. I really appreciate you being part of the conversation. If you found value in today's episode and want to support what we're building here, you'll find a link to our Patreon in the description. As a workplace expert, I'm here to help you resolve your workplace dilemmas. If your organization could benefit from my expertise, feel free to get in touch via our website, yellowwood.ie. Yellowwood, your external learning and development partner. Take a different path to success in your career, leadership, team, and organization. Until next time, take care, and we'll see you soon.